Hi, this is Phil, and we're in pre-hearty hello mode here. Just wanted to give a little bit of an explanation of what's going on with this particular episode. A little bit different than what we do. This came out of a text exchange that Joe Lowery and I had on Sunday morning. He was wondering where Azuni was, explained that, yeah, he's still working in match fitness. He just got here. He'll be on the field. Things are going to be great, yada, yada, yada. And we got to talking a little bit about the start of the season and set up a one-on-one interview, which I got to do Tuesday evening here. So what we're going to do is all on the other side of our theme music. We'll get to that interview. Moises and I are planning to do a regular emergency podcast later in the week here. And obviously talking about the SKC win, previewing Portland, talking about the first watch party of the season, talking about that fantastic TIFO that went up, and all the other kind of doings that are crossing our transom regarding Austin FC. But this is more of an expansive look all 30 teams in the league. We didn't hit every single team, but we sure hit a lot of them. In particular, started with San Diego and that kind of wild match that they had to put themselves on the map against the Galaxy on Sunday night. If you missed that, you missed a good one. So anyway, we will, after we get on the other side of the theme music, listen to Joe, see what he had to say. We do have some Austin content in there. We did talk about the team a little bit, got the Phoenix eye view from him on what he thought of Austin, but also I think a really good deep dive on what's going on in the league with week one. Joe obviously really knows his stuff. With Backheeled, he does really extensive content on MLS and does a lot of things with USMNT as well. So definitely worth a listen. We are very, very happy to bring this. And yeah, stay tuned and promise you we'll have expansive amounts of Austin content later in the week.
Emergency podcast. Listen to the things that we gotta talk about in emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies. This time, though, we are talking about the MLS emergencies. It is week one in the books, and we have a special guest. Don't get to do this very often, so really glad to do this. This is Joe Lowery of Total Soccer Show and Backheeled fame, and this is your chance to humble brag, give your word count for the preseason previews that you did for Backheeled. I know it was immense.
Oh, I don't think it's a brag, Phil. I think if anything, it's an indictment of me and how I choose to spend my time. No, I wrote just over 50,000 words for our team by team MLS previews over at Backheeled. 30 teams I've decided is just too many. So I don't know exactly how we're going to get around that, but I've decided it's just too many teams. No, it's a huge project, but I think it's one that really does set apart what we're doing at Backheeled. And I think it provides genuine value to fans for all these different teams. So really happy that it was done, that it is done, and I think they turned out really well. So I'm really proud.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. I did a little preseason preview stuff too, but not to the extent that you did it. So I commend you for what you have done. Yeah, so let's go ahead just to give people a little bit of flavor. Of course, if you go to the Backheeled site and subscribe, you can see all of those and see how right or wrong you are so far. But just want to get some of the top line kind of ideas that you had out of going into the 2025 season, maybe the 4 or 5 kind of top stories that you see bubbling up as we get into this 30th year of MLS.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, man. That's crazy. So do you want me to just run through some storylines?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'll just interrupt you as I need to, but just go ahead and lay them on us one at a time here.
Okay, you got it. I think the big story coming into this year, especially after Sunday, is San Diego and what they were going to look like this season and how they were going to play. And I chatted with Mikey Varas a little bit over the offseason, Tyler Heaps, who is their CSO in charge of that front office over the offseason as well. And they talked a big game to me and others around the media space about how they wanted to play. Tyler Heaps told me that, he thought they had the most detailed style of play of any expansion team that's come into the league, which is quite a high bar. I think we saw it on Sunday. They do have very clear ideas of how they want to go out and play. And they've built this roster, maybe outside of Chucky Lozano, who I think was given to Tyler Heaps rather than the other way around. They built this roster in a way that shows their intent, which is to be a team that dominates the ball and controls the way the game is played. I thought an interesting nugget, and this is in a piece that's up on Backheeled as well. It looks behind the scenes at San Diego that I put together. I think an interesting nugget of what they want to do is they want to control possession at home, yes, and that's fairly common in Major League Soccer.
Right.
But they wanted to try to control the ball on the road as well, which is
Okay.
exactly what they did at Dignity Health the other night. It was the first time the Galaxy had lost in that building in more than a calendar year. They didn't lose at all there last year. They want to try to control the ball. And one of the reasons why they want to do that, Heaps told me, is because they want to be very clear with their players as to how they want to play in any given game. They don't want to have any doubts. And if you change what you do at home versus on the road, Heaps' theory is that it makes it harder for them, which I think tracks. That does make sense to
Mhm.
me. Another reason they want to do it is they want to minimize physical output. They want to try to own the ball as much as possible, to not have to chase the game, to not have to scramble around in transition for 60 minutes of a 90-minute game. They want to be the team dictating the terms of the game. I think they believe that they can do that at home and they can do it on the road. And Phil, for me, and I'll let you interject here,
Sure, sure.
I think
Yeah.
that's all fascinating. We haven't seen a lot of expansion teams. I don't think we've ever seen an expansion team quite do what they're trying to do. And the
Yeah.
early returns, not flawless, but one game, one win into the year, and some pretty good play on the field in Carson. I think so far so good.
Yeah. I think from Austin's perspective, obviously, Josh Wolf had the same philosophy going in. Didn't quite have the horses the first year, or maybe
Yeah,
arguably any of the years other than
sure.
2022 to do what they were trying to do. So, are there any key players that have been part of this project so far that you see
Yeah.
manifesting?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of guys that are crucial. Lozano is one of them on the left wing.
Mhm.
Luca De La Torre in midfield is just, I think, a really, really good fit for this team, and just would be a really high profile addition for any team in MLS, right? You think about his profile, somebody who's got 20 plus caps with the U.S. men's national team, was over and actually playing for the most part with Celta Vigo in La Liga, and is just an excellent player in terms of this league's level. He fits right in with what they want to do on the ball. But the player that's really stood out to me the most so far in preseason and in their season opener against the Galaxy is Anders Dreyer, who comes
Right.
in. He's 26 years old. He's a designated player. He's playing on that right wing defensively in possession. He tucks into the half space, and it's sort of him and Luca De La Torre flanking Marcus Ingvartsen, who's their number 9, who's coming over from their sister club in Denmark, FC Nordsjælland. And Dreyer pinches all the way in, and he has license to drop super deep as well. He is the truest playmaker type that they have in this
Mhm.
team. He's coming over from Anderlecht in Belgium, one of the better teams, not the best teams, but one of the better teams in Belgium when he was there, which means he is still having to work for some of that production, but he's functioning in a ball dominant team like San Diego wanna be. And he looked awesome against the
Mhm.
Galaxy. I thought he looked really, really good. If you're looking for a player to watch for San Diego, Lozano was the obvious pick, but I'm not so sure he's going to be the best pick for the season.
Yeah, which is unfortunate for my best ball fantasy team because I
I
picked
think I
him.
think Chuck is still going to be really good. By the way, I
Yeah,
think he's still going to be a really good player.
right.
But
I
Dreyer,
hope so. Yeah.
yeah, I've been impressed. I've been impressed.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Actually, David Goss was in our it's mostly Austin podcast draft, but Goss was part of it. And I went totally anti-Goss theorem for 4 of my main picks.
Nice,
So yeah, it
nice.
was
I
good.
love that. I'm here
So
for.
we'll
I'm
see.
here for it.
Latiloth and Lozano and yeah, that. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see how that works out. I got to see a good portion of that game, and certainly San Diego looked good, but it was also against kind of a hollowed out Galaxy midfield too. And I
Sure.
know that there were a lot of pundits who are saying, yeah, top 4 in the West. I'm not quite feeling that with all the loss they've had, not just the Ricky Pooch injury, but obviously losing Brugman, losing Delgado. I think that those
Yep.
are pretty big holes to fill. And I'm just curious, does that portend kind of a bad future for the Galaxy, or is it just a one game thing?
I don't think it. I think it's somewhere in the middle. So I still
Mhm.
have the Galaxy. I think I predicted them 3rd in the West behind LAFC and Seattle.
Okay.
That is a step back from where they were last year. They finished 2nd. They had first, almost within their grasp, and lost it
Sure.
on decision day, in a great moment from decision day last year. I think this Galaxy team is going to have to work through some things, and that was going to be true before we saw them take the field with a new look midfield with Marco Reus, who is such a different attacking midfield type to Ricky Pooch. I
Mhm.
think there's a reason why Greg Vinny started those 2 guys together in some of their games late last season, rather than spelling sort of one for the other. Is Royce is just such a different player. Puig kind of runs hot and Royce runs cold. It just in terms of how they move around the field and how they approach the game. And then you got Christian Ramirez, who doesn't have any chemistry with Gabriel Peck or with Diego Fagundes yet. And there's just a lot to work through. I still think on talent, this is one of the 3 best teams in the Western Conference. I don't know that there are an absolute top tier team without Ricky Puig in the way that they were last year. But man, they're missing a lot of pieces right now. They're missing the chemistry piece, and they're missing Joseph Paintsall on that left side. I still think they're going to be one of the better teams in the West, not least because I don't know who else is really challenging. And that's a hard thing. When I went through to predict the West this year, I felt like I had a really hard time with it. I think LAFC's squad is good, but they've had a lot of turnover as well. I'm still fairly confident in them. Seattle is excellent, I think, this year, and I have a hard time envisioning them not being one of the top teams, although they've got a bunch of games on their schedule. And then you run through the list. Minnesota, I thought looked great to end last season. They had a Charmin soft schedule. Then you look at Colorado, they had a bunch of penalties last year. That was a weird thing. RSL were great last year, but they've lost so much of their attacking production and still have huge question marks in terms
Yep.
of their transfer business. The exact same goes for Houston. Then you look at a team like Austin, who I think spent a bunch of money and I think will be better this year, certainly than they were last year. It's just too early to tell exactly what this team's going to look like. And we'll get on to their 1-1 over SKC later, and I can share more of my thoughts there. But I don't think they're an obvious shoe-in just yet to be in that top tier of teams. Then you have named 2/3 of the teams in the West by now. Like, it just isn't clear to me. And I think the Galaxy on talent are still in that group.
Right. So one more thing about San Diego before we move on to other storylines. What we're seeing so far, it's a really great opening day. Reminded me of St. Louis in 23. Their come from behind victory against Austin. Again, helped by defensive error.
Because somebody passed them the ball. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, some parallels there. But I'm just wondering, I mean, St. Louis came out to this really hot start in 23, won the West, but they still got found out by the end of the year, and then they had to drop off in 24. And I'm just curious. I know it's a different style of play. I know St. Louis is kind of more modified energy drink, but just kind of wondering, is San Diego smart enough and deep enough to not be found out by midseason or end of season?
Yes and no. I think they're smart enough. I don't think right now they're deep enough. So I think their style, and that's sort of what I get at on the smarts side of things.
Yeah.
I think what they did on Sunday is far more repeatable than what St. Louis did basically throughout their entire expansion season in 23. The way San Diego controlled the game and were so tight defensively and were really patient on the ball, if not creative in the final third, because they weren't. But I think the talent is higher on the San Diego team than it was for St. Louis. I think they're going to be a far better team, frankly, on balance than St. Louis were. And I don't think they're going to fade down the stretch in the same way. If they were to fade down the stretch, and I guess really for St. Louis, it was in the playoffs, really, more than anything. But
sure,
if they were to fade, it's going to be because the depth isn't there. Tyler Heaps had talked about this with Charlie Boehm over at MLSsoccer.com about how they're going to use this opening stage of the season to see where they need depth, to see where they need pieces. Maybe some of the depth guys they have that frankly, I still haven't seen a ton of because they haven't played a lot in this league. Maybe some of those guys are difference makers and are really strong, not just 1 through 11 guys, but maybe San Diego also have 12 through to 16 or 17 in the way that I think you need to be one of the better teams in MLS these days. Maybe they've got that. I'm a little skeptical. I think they probably know they still need to add 1 or 2 pieces. And don't forget, they still got that DP spot open too.
Right. Maybe a goalkeeper too.
Yeah. No, honestly, I don't think so. I think CJ Dos Santos is going to be the guy. They've got 3 like kind of career MLS backups. So I understand where the question's coming from. Yes. They also have Duran Ferry on loan as their 4th goalkeeper, who is maybe their first ever signing as a young kid who was already playing in the Southern California area in USL. They've signed him and loaned him back out. Like, they got a lot of goalkeepers on the books, and I think they're pretty happy, at least right now, with how that looks.
Okay, let's go east. We've talked about a lot of West teams so far. Just what are some things that are jumping out to you there? Obviously, Atlanta brought in a bunch of players. Obviously, Cincinnati with Denke, who's another one of my Goss Theorem busting baseball team players.
Good start. Good start for that addition on your team, Phil. No doubt.
Sure. Yeah.
You mentioned those 2 teams. I think that's a huge storyline this season is Atlanta spending money, Cincinnati spending money. We can split and go with one or the other. With Atlanta United first. They looked over the weekend like a team that added $30+ million to their attack. Yeah. Latte Lath looks fantastic. He looks like he's worth the money, and that's not easy to do for $22 million in Major League Soccer. He looked excellent on set pieces, which I didn't expect, frankly. And he is just lightning quick in a way that so few players in this league are. I don't think there's going to be a single center back, maybe other than Amiro Garces for the Galaxy, who can keep pace with Latte Lath, and maybe not even Garces. The dude is rapid. Miguel Almiron still looks really good. Now I want to be careful. I'm not using CF Montreal as like the ultimate test here for Miguel Almiron or for Latte Lath, but you can only play who's in front of you. And those guys looked dominant in their moments on the ball. Then you toss in Marenchuk and Sabalov Janitze. There's going to be a lot of pressure on that double pivot and a lot of pressure on that back line. That's what we said about the Galaxy last year. And the Galaxy won MLS Cup and we're legitimately a very, very good team. I think Atlanta's floor is a bit lower, maybe even than the Galaxy's was at times last year. And it felt kind of low for the Galaxy last year at times. But man, they look filthy good. And then we're talking about teams reloading in the attack. Cincy really is the other one that pops when you think about the moves they made this winter. They broke the MLS record transfer fee at first, and I think it was back in November, to sign Kevin Denke from Cercle Bruges over in Belgium. And then they bring in Evander as the most expensive intra-league cash deal ever. Ever's a bit silly because it's been, like 3 weeks now? But they retooled so quickly after things soured with Lucho Acosta. They've managed to get Luca Oriano onto a new contract that I think he earned in a lot of respect. He's a DP level player who's not going to be on that DP tag. I don't know if they still have the flexibility or not on the cap to go out there and add a third DP. They have the DP spot open. So in that way that they could. I just don't know what the inner workings of their allocation money situation is. But they've retooled, and I thought they looked good against the Red Bulls, who have a nice defense and are a very, very competent team, I think, under Sandro Schwarz. In week one, Cincy looked good. Denke looked good. They're balancing CCC. I don't know, man. Like, some of these Eastern Conference teams don't seem to be messing around one bit.
I have it between Cincinnati and Seattle as early contenders for the Shield right now. And I wondered a little bit, Acosta has just been so talismanic for that team. And obviously now he's at
Yeah.
Dallas, which I think is an interesting plug-in. You see these moving parts. Obviously you see Ferreira and Areola go to Seattle. But I'm
Yeah.
curious as to how the team is going to be different with Evander pulling strings as opposed to Acosta.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Phil, and it's something I'm eager to dig into a bit more this year. I think you have your finger right on the pulse of one of the more interesting things that we're going to see for Cincy. I think of Evander as being a guy who's going to drift less than Lucho does. I think Evander is going to be a little more content to stay in that central channel where if you think about Lucho Acosta, remember back when Alvaro Barreal was first in Cincy and he was this winger and Cincy were a disaster, and then Pat Noonan comes in and eventually he shifts him to a left wing back right after one game. They play a 4-4-2 diamond Philly style in Noonan's first game, and then that goes out the window, and then it's wing backs from them forward. And Barreal is this superstar at left wing back. He is like the poster child in MLS. And honestly, one of them on this side of the Atlantic for, if you've got an underperforming but skillful winger, drop him back a line. Like maybe he can be a great wing back. And Barreal was that. And one of the things that made that, I think it was 2022 into maybe 2023, maybe I'm still a year off somewhere, that early, oh crap, since you're good now version of FC Cincinnati, one of the things that made them so good was that Lucho would drift over to that left side and combine with Barreal. And one of the things that made them so good, even after Barreal was moved to Brazil and Luca Oriano came in, is that Lucho would go and find the game where Oriano was, and they would combine together. And I don't get the sense that Evander's quite that sort of player. Not that he's so disciplined that he won't drop to get on the ball. He will. I don't think he's going to range side to side quite as much. I think he provides maybe a little bit more on dead balls than Lucho Acosta. But really, I'm just curious to see more because I don't think there are going to be any massive system-altering changes to what Cincy want to do. I think by and large, not that the details don't matter, they do, but by and large, it's going to be basically plug and play, and that's what we're seeing in the first 180 minutes of their season so far.
Okay. And do you see, and this is an open-ended question maybe, but do you see like maybe one or two teams where there's either going to be this kind of major spike up or this major drop down that might be surprising to some folks?
Chicago are a fascinating team right now. I really think that they could end up spiking up in a big way. What were they bottom of the East last year? They were the bottom or second to
They were
bottom. Of the
close.
Eastern
Yeah, I think they were
Conference last
like
year. Yeah, I mean they
14th. Yeah.
they were real bad. And Greg Berhalter's come into this team as people know, and he's added at least 5 new starters, at least one center back in Jack Elliott from the Union, which I think was a great pickup. They've added this young right back Barroso from Sporting's youth system over in Portugal. They've added Kawame in midfield, who hasn't featured just yet for this team. They've added Zinkernagel, a great name, into their attacking midfield line. And they've added Jonathan Bamba. I lost track in there somewhere, but I think that's 5 dudes. They've added a ton of new players. And Greg Berhalter has completely changed how this team is playing. And you could see the high highs against Columbus over the weekend in that 4-2 loss when they jumped out to a 1-0 lead, then put themselves back in a 2-1 lead, and then they just crumbled hard. You can see that there are probably still some low lows for this team as they get used to playing out from the back. Maybe the style doesn't quite fit the players even after some of these guys come in. I think it's going to be a multi-window rebuild for this Fire team. But would it shock me to see the Fire surging up the Eastern Conference table and like flirting with the home playoff game? Which I hate that we have to do this now. I guess it's like a home playoff series, right? Where you get 2 of the 3 because everybody gets a home playoff game. Top 4 seed. Would that shock me? Honestly, no. I really don't think it would over the Eastern Conference. And then in terms of teams that maybe are at risk of cratering a little bit, I do think RSL are in that risk over in the West.
Yeah.
When you think about all the talent that they've lost.
Course,
in the East, Orlando had a bit of a rocky start, and they've been the model of like good but not quite great in MLS so far. And maybe this is a year in which they take a little bit of a step back. But I feel more confident that maybe there's some teams ready to rise than I do exactly sure of which teams might be falling.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Good. I guess one more kind of team on the rise maybe that we should talk about is San Jose. Obviously, Arena is kind of the MLS whisperer, being able to raise the floor of teams. I'm just curious about what you thought of them coming out, getting that 4-0 win right away, and not even relying on kind of one of the 2 main people that you would count on them to get goals.
Criminal that I didn't just mention them, Phil. You're a pro, and way to squeeze them in here. I had a chance over the offseason to chat with some folks in San Jose and to get a little bit of a feel of the transition and like how Bruce Arena is changing things. And some of the things are so unique as opposed to him, because I think at times I've been a bit skeptical of the Bruce Arena aura, right? Where he comes into a team and it does really feel like everything changes really quickly. And part of that's because I guess sort of some of my, not like beginning years, but really a formative moment for me in my career and like doing this for a living
Mhm.
was Cuba and seeing Bruce Arena and some really puzzling
Right.
tactical choices there. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I've been a bit skeptical of that. And I think there are things that Bruce doesn't do so well. But man, you talk to these players in San Jose, guys that have played for him before, like Dave Romney, guys that have been in San Jose for a long time, like Paul Marie. You talk to both of these different groups of players, and they're just like, the dude walks in and everybody understands what he's about. Everybody understands that he has won more games in MLS than you have, that he has won more MLS Cups than anybody else, that he knows what he's doing. There is just this belief and a trust in a natural buy-in that Bruce Arena generates because he's done it before. And he's done basically this exact thing that San Jose are trying to do before in New England, where he turned that team around after they were really, really struggling, and he made them into something. And there was some fortunate bounces along the way, but it's hard to win shields and trophies without that. I think there is real trust in San Jose that he is going to, if not make them into a shield team during his time there, because I don't think that's very likely, but I think there is trust that he's going to make them into a competent MLS franchise, which is honestly not something that they've been in a decade plus. So there's a lot to like about this. I think the shift to the back three is really interesting and a good way to stabilize the defense and give up more goals than any team in any single season in MLS history last year. I think that he's going to find some real talent out of their super draft picks, both center backs that they drafted in the draft this past year and also Jamar Ricketts, who started at left wing back opposite Christian Espinosa in this game. He was a super draft pick last year. He looked so much fun on that left side. And then you got Chicho Arango and Joseph Martinez up top. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't think it's going to be great. And I definitely don't think they were 4 goals better than RSL on Saturday. And Bruce Arena said as much after the game. But man, this team's going to be better. They got way better in terms of the roster over the offseason. They're going to make sense tactically for the most part. Like,
Can't be worse.
They're going to be farther. They're going to be far away from the spoon this year. And that is at least way further than they were last year when it was in their hands. But that is like the bare minimum. And that the minimum they are going to climb over that bar.
And they are the clubhouse leader in goal celebrations too. Rodriguez with the kid pitch invader.
Yes.
That was good.
So good. You had some acrobatics. You had the Rodriguez moment. There were good moments on the goals.
Yeah. Those are great. Oh, so one more team that you had mentioned New England. American Soccer Analysis, Elliot McKinley did a graph and showing all the returning minutes from last year, and New England by far is the least, something like 37% of their returning starter minutes from last year. So just curious about that. And I'm also kind of a mean question attached to this. First coach fired, is it Caleb Porter or is it Phil Neville?
Oh man. Wow. I will go with Caleb Porter. I'm really not sure. I think the Revs are going to be, again, the bar was in the basement. I think the Revs are going to be better this year than last year, but you're not kidding about the roster turnover. I think Elliot also put out that stat along with that graph of it's been the lowest percentage of returning minutes for an MLS team in 5 years or something like that, at least that long. Like, this is not just, wow, they had more turnover than any other team in MLS this offseason. This is, wow, this is like historic levels of turnover from last year to this year. And Caleb Porter came out and said in preseason, and this was in the Backheeled preview that I wrote, he said something to the effect of, these are my players. Like, we had some good players last year. These are my players now. Like, if we don't win, the implication is, if the Revs don't win, it's on Caleb Porter and it's on Curtin Alpha, who have put this squad together. And we're going to find out what this looks like. It was not a banner start for them in a 0-0 draw with Nashville, but we saw a lot of new players in this team. Leo Campana started up top. Ganago started at left, shaded towards that left side. We saw Youssef, who joined in the summer window last year. In central midfield, Jackson Ewell arrived in the offseason, 2 new center backs, a new fullback. This is a super different team. It's not like they're an expansion team, but there almost are some expansion team vibes to how few minutes they have together. They're the next closest thing to San Diego. Like, that's the reality. It's a weird situation. I honestly don't know if it's going to work out or not. It's too early to tell.
Okay. And then I guess one more team I wanted to ask about that just came to me, honorary Western Conference, Eastern Conference team, Nashville. Just curious about them, and a particular Ani Mukhtar and how is he gonna have a bounce back year? Kind of a similar situation what we had in Driussi in Austin. Of course, Driussi left for River Plate during the offseason, but similar where you have MVP caliber performances in 2022. In Mukhtar's case, of course, he won it. Driussi came close, but then you've had these kind of dramatic drop-offs that have been progressively worse over the last 2 years.
I think that All-Star game in 2022 was the first time you and I met, Phil, where it was Driussi and Mukhtar. And that was a fun MVP race. I remember really enjoying that. I'll put it this way. I think if Nashville could get $10 million from someone for Hani Mukhtar, they would take it. And part of that is because it's a new era for them. BJ Callahan is in charge as manager, and he is really providing a different energy and in some ways a different focus for this team, both tactically and that they want to use the ball now. Ben Wright, who does great stuff for us at Backheeled, also started 615 Soccer, who do great coverage of the Nashville soccer scene,
Yeah,
the Nashville
sure.
SC in particular. Like Ben's been all over this 4-2-2 shape that they've been running throughout the season so far, preseason, and I guess match day one. They're more focused on building from the back and trying to control the ball. They're also focused on getting younger and getting a bit more spry and going and actually filling U22 spots and finding talent. They signed Matthew Cochran from USL, who is a former FC Dallas Academy player and is another example of someone who's gone from an MLS Academy to USL to actually get minutes and is benefiting now with an MLS move and who's already playing first team minutes. So Nashville, I think, want to change. And you asked me, is this going to be bounce back year for Mukhtar? My answer is probably not, just because I don't think this team's there yet. I think they've just finished up the first, not even finished it yet. I suppose they're 2 months away from finishing up the first transfer window of a multi-window rebuild. I honestly think this team is still quite far away from contending. I don't think their attack can do it. I don't think they've got enough juice in this team. And I don't think the defense is strong enough for that not to matter. So if I had to guess, Mukhtar probably exceeds his 8 goals from last year. Does he hit his 15 from 2023? If I'm a Nashville fan, I would be stoked if that turned out to be the case in 25.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So it seems like maybe they would have wanted to find a buyer in the offseason, but they've got him, so they got to try to make the best of it. Because he's still, he's still one of their best 11 players, though, right? And he's still talented enough to
Totally.
get
Yeah.
on
I
the
mean,
field.
he's the centerpiece for this team. There's no doubt about that. My point is simply that I think with all the change that BJ Callahan is ushering in, I can imagine a world in which Nashville will be very happy to pick a DP of their own. Like this new era of Nashville. That's not to say that Mike Jacobs wasn't involved before, but to pick somebody that sort of fits Callahan's vision and maybe their refreshed vision as a club. And I do believe that Mukhtar's best years are behind him. And I don't know that he's going to hit that peak again in the same way. So I would sell for $10 million if that came across my desk. I don't know if Nashville would, and I certainly don't think that's actually going to happen.
Okay, great. Okay, well now let's get a Phoenix eye view on Austin. Let's
Yes.
run down what you talked about in the preseason and then week one. I know that you pinged me on Sunday morning wondering where Zuni is, and it's like, yeah, he's still working into match fitness, but certainly a lot of people here are very excited to see what he can do. We had a welcome party for him last week. Yeah, there were some Albanian fans that came in, had Albanian scarves for him. Yeah, he's definitely talking the game in terms of wanting to break records and score goals, and he seems pretty focused. He's got a wife with a baby on the way back in Barcelona. They're staying there. They've got family support. I talked to Nico Estevez a few weeks ago about that, and he's just going to come here and focus and try to bang in goals and make a big difference on this offense that's already had a bit of an overhaul.
Wow.
So just curious what you're seeing, and then we can talk, I guess, a little bit about from week one and what might happen as things progress.
Yeah, I thought there were some things I didn't expect from Austin in the season opener against Sporting Kansas City. Namely, I didn't expect Nico Estevez to go with the 4-4-2, which is what I saw in this game, Phil. I'm curious about some of your thoughts here as well. But the way I saw it was very much Brandon Vasquez and Owen Wolff up top in the same line for basically the entire time that Owen Wolff was on the field, which was 70 plus minutes of this game. It was a double pivot with Ilie and Danny Pereira. It was the back four, and then he had the 2 wingers of O'Brien on the right and Bakari on the left, which is a bit of a flip from what we saw at times last year. Like this team looked different. And I thought when Estevez came in that they really weren't going to look all that different. And I suppose that when Sebastian Driussi changes and when your DPs change, that does kick off some other change in this tactical setup. I don't think it's that Estevez pictures Owen Wolff as a striker or as a second forward. I think it's that he pictures Zuni as that player, right? Where all offseason long, the question is, how does Zuni fit in Estevez, who's mostly been a single forward kind of guy? You already signed Vasquez. Where do you put him? Do you put him on the left wing where he has played, but that's a little bit awkward for him? Or in doing so, by the way, you have to take off O'Brien, who I think is a sneaky good player in this league. Or do you change the setup and do you go to a 2 forward front that Estevez has basically never used in his coaching career? And I think we're learning that the answer is the second option, where he's going to play with 2 forwards. It's going to be Uzuni sort of playing off of Vasquez would be my best guess. And then you can run with 2 of the 3 of Ilie, Pereira, and Wolff in any given game. And I think basically all of those combinations will work just fine. And then you have Bakari and O'Brien racing down the wings. And there's a lot of fun there, man. There's a roster in there. There's a tactical setup in there that I think can cause some legitimate problems. So I thought the setup was interesting. That is by far my biggest takeaway rather than the 3 points or the result or honestly anything else. I didn't think it was an especially enticing game overall. But that tactical shift to me, Phil, feels super notable.
Yeah, well, there was the first ever open practice about a month ago, and we got to talk to Estevez a little bit before that, and he was talking about this kind of maybe inclination towards a 4-4-2 some of the time. And it's certainly they can play a 4-3-3 still. You can have a Zuni thrown
Sure.
in as a left wing. You can have him tuck in. You can have Jeremy Biru as a fullback playing up, which I think is going to happen a lot. I mean, you have Pereira as a nominal 8. You've had Wolf as a nominal 10, which hasn't really
Yeah.
worked in past years. But I think he's made a big leap in the offseason. I think he has some things to prove, in part because dad's no longer his coach. But also, he's 20 now. He's maturing. And I thought he had an immense game on Saturday. I
Yeah,
thought he was
same.
really, really good. He got the assist for the goal in the corner. He was wreaking some havoc throughout. But also, we got to talk to Estevez a few weeks ago, just did a one-on-one interview with him. And basically, he said, it wasn't quite this mean, but it was kind of to the effect of formations are kind of these constructs for people who don't really know a
Totally.
lot about soccer. And there's this fluidity to what they're going to do. So I think, and again, the other kind of question with the midfield, once he gets worked in, is Basard Sabovic, who's the Swedish international who came in as well. They're going with what I'd call the 10 approach. But at the same time, it seems like that's going to work. It seems like they're going to have 6s and 8s that are doing some of that 10-like work. And as long as they can get the ball progressing into the final third, which has been challenged under Joss Wolf, but it seems like they're much more focused on that. We had this kind of construct last year that we would call the horseshoe of sadness that some fans christened.
Yep.
We're just basically passing this half circle
Around the box, baby.
And now it's more of a horseshoe of friskiness. They will do that, but they'll do that to set and move the ball forward. And if you notice against SKC, they had a pretty low line. If you were not familiar yet, MLS Stats, MLS Analytics, Sebastian Bush's site, incredible work, really great graphics post-match, really good resource. SKC played a really low line and kind of very similar to what Portland did against Vancouver. So one of the big tasks, and Estevez was talking about this, and I thought this was interesting, took some accountability after Saturday's game, said Vasquez is getting in good spots, his off-ball movement is incredible, but basically just need to work on getting him the ball more. And Estevez said, I need to figure out how to do that. So I think if that's the big thing, if they can figure out movement and they don't want to just cross and hope like was the system under Wolf. So the big key for me, and just want to get your perception on that as well, is not so much the front line. Like that's set. They've got really talented players on the front line. I think they're going to score a lot of goals. I think they're going to help each other out. But it's how do you get that ball progressing from what is a pretty solid back line to a midfield that's not quite defined as here's your 10, here's your 8, here's your 6. But maybe Wolf takes on kind of those 10-like tendencies as the season goes on. That to me is the big question in terms of whether this succeeds or not. I think they can hit top 4 with the talent. It's just figuring out that particular piece.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think excellent points all the way around. On the idea of breaking down a team that sits deeper, like SKC did over the weekend, and the goal doesn't come from open play directly. It's a bit of a weird game. There's not a lot of clear-cut chances on either side, frankly.
Right.
When Austin are up against that kind of team, and I do think they're going to play that kind of team a decent amount this season, both because of some of the tactical setups in the West, but also because they're going to be scary in transition. You think about Bukhari in the open field, that's scary. You think about Obrian in the open field, that's scary. Uzuni, I think, scored a lot of his goals as the accent runner crashing the box in Spain, where those goals are coming in transition, playing for a weaker team in La Liga. This team is going to cause problems on the break. But then again, that's where a lot of teams tend to cause problems because it's easier to do that stuff. So what happens when a team like Sporting Kansas City gums up the works and they sit in a deep 4-5-1 block or a deeper 4-4-2 block if you're somebody else, and they say, go ahead and break us down. We would love for that to happen. We'd love for you to try. And in exchange, we're going to take all the space in behind your back line and use it to our advantage. That's a concern because I don't know if Uzuni is going to be a guy who can handle some of that playmaking burden. I don't know if Bukhari is a guy up against a low block who is maximized, or at the very least, who can help produce and help carry some of that chance creation burden. That's been the issue for Austin for their entire existence, in my mind, where Driussi is wearing the number 10 shirt. He's not a number 10. He's a box crasher. He is a solid off-ball mover. He's a connector. He's not a playmaker. And I'm still wondering, like, where is that guy? Because honestly, I don't think it's Owen Wolf. I don't think it's Danny Pereira. I think Uzuni is your best chance at it, but even he's not quite going to be that player. So maybe Austin figure out a way to do it, and they're well drilled enough that they don't need one person to carry so much of that weight. Maybe they're not. Like, that is, I think, a huge question for this team.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're going to do because again, they had. I don't know if Rodolfo Barel necessarily had his eye on like an elite 10, but they decided to go Zuni instead. They decided to go, here's a forward. And I think a lot of what Zuni's going to do, and you saw this happening with some of the other players with Austin, is I think there's going to be a lot of shots from distance, and Zuni is one that definitely does that. His average in La Liga for a distance shot, 18 yards. And so I think what's going to happen, he'll take a lot of those. You've got Bukari who could run in with speed. You've got Vasquez with positioning. And I think that they're going to get some goals that way. But yeah, again, that is that big question. Who is that creator? But again, like from Wolf so far, I'm seeing a lot better indicators that he can do that kind of work this year as opposed to even last year. And some of that might be systemic, and part of that might just be the belief too. You have these kind of words thrown around like freedom and being able to make our own decisions and things like that with the Estevez that I don't think that players were necessarily feeling under Wolf. So I think that there is this adjustment that players are making based on the coaching that I think is translating. And again, it's tough to tell from one kind of gum up the works kind of game against SKC. 3 points certainly better than none. And they've only won one other home opener or one other opening match in their season, and that was 2022. Incidentally, the only opener they've had that was also under 42 degrees at game time.
Hey, now we're talking. It's that frigid air that does it for us. That tracks. Can I toss out a couple of other things on Austin that I think
absolutely.
are
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
One is I do wonder if we think this 4-4-2 is going to be the primary look. And I do agree with the Estevez, by the way. Formations are mostly like made up concepts, but they're also like a helpful shorthand guide to help people picture what's going on.
For sure.
I don't know. It's like you got to give somebody some directions here when you're trying to get them to your place for dinner or whatever, right? So
for sure.
I don't know. I think I would definitely not be quite as harsh as Estevez on that, but I think he's onto something. If you think that it's probably going to be a 2-man midfield, which to go deeper than just the formation of 4-4-2 generally implies that you are, or you could be a little lighter in that part of the field than some other teams who might play with 3, like LAFC as an example, or like they've been doing so far. It means that you might need a little bit more ground coverage, especially when you're probably not going to dominate the ball, because Austin, I don't think are really going to be that kind of team this year. If the first choice pairing is Ilie and Danny Pereira, I have some concerns about that.
Sure.
Because I don't think either one is particularly fleet of foot. You could see it in this game when Manu Garcia, SKC's new DP, comes off the bench in the second half. He skirts right around Ilie and Danny Pereira both on a sequence and ends up taking a shot at the other end. And Manu Garcia doesn't necessarily seem like the world's greatest athlete to me either. So I do wonder what that's going to look like. And you mentioned, Phil, this team having the attacking talent to be a top 4 team. I think that's true, or at least I think it could be true. I don't think that's a bad bet necessarily. The concern is still, like, can you win a lot of games with this back line? Like, that is still, I think, an open question as far as I'm concerned. Between Cascante and Heinz Eich, and Svatak comes in and doesn't really seem to show a whole lot. I think the fullbacks are fairly solid, but I am worried about the center backs, and I'm worried about them putting a lot on Brad Stuver's plate, and he can handle a lot, but he can't handle quite everything. So I think there's a lot to be excited about with this team. I think they're one of the more interesting teams in the West right now, but I do have some worries like the further back you go on the field, except in box.
Well, and the thing is, I think they can do different looks. Svatak is rounding into a really good center back. Heinz Eich has been really solid. I think he was one of the better pickups of the offseason for Austin. Certainly, they had a great center back injury plague of 2023. Definitely getting him has been helpful. And Cascante, I mean, goals added loves Cascante. If you want to get ball progression like you saw in the SKC game and you have him as a center back, yeah, he's got some defensive liabilities. His off-ball actions are not the greatest, but he's really good in terms of a ball progressor. He's almost a 6 or an 8 playing in the center back role. Yeah, point taken about that, but I do think they are working a lot on kind of this defensive discipline and making sure that they stay tight and compact. And SKC is not maybe necessarily the biggest threat in the world, but Joveljic is obviously a really good forward. And there was one sequence which I thought was really impressive out of the match, about 72nd minute. Joveljic gets in one-on-one and Stuver, and then Mikkel Dessler just comes out of nowhere, bodies him, takes the ball off him, and clears it. And it's just an incredible. Dessler, I think, is one of the more underrated fullbacks in the league. And I think he's definitely worth looking at some tape on, because I think that he is going to, in this kind of first full season that he's got, I think he's going to round out into one of the league's better fullbacks. I don't think that backline's necessarily a liability for them. I think if there is any kind of big question mark area, it's still midfield. Ilie, in terms of leadership, in terms of kind of discipline, in terms of just knowing the game, I think that helps a lot, because you had Alex Ring in that 6 role last year, and he had a time in 23, lost the captaincy. There's some weird stuff going on. I think he was a lot more solid last year, definitely exhibited those leadership roles, but I think Ilie is bringing this kind of sense of calm to the team that they haven't had ever, quite frankly. Just to hear the coaching staff talk, hear Burrell talk about what he does and what he brings. I think I understand why LAFC moved on from him, but I think that getting him was one of the smarter things. It was the smart choice by Rodolfo Burrell to bring him in during the offseason.
Yes, it was. Well played on that first.
We love that joke,
I think, by the way. It's great. It honestly doesn't get old, because we saw that
never
commercial too
gets
many
old.
times. So it's impossible for it to get old. I think, don't get me wrong, I love the Elliott edition. I think it's a really, really smart edition. If you can get 2,000 minutes out of him and you can get 2,000 minutes, like good minutes out of Pereira, 2,000 out of Wolf, maybe a little out of the two new guys that have come in over the offseason in central midfield, that group looks better straight up than it did last year. My concerns are still a little bit on the defensive end and how you balance all that stuff in a two-man midfield. But, I mean, this team, there's no doubt in my mind that this team is better constructed this year than last year. Not to say that that everything makes perfect sense because we just haven't seen it yet. Maybe it does, and we're just not picturing the world in which that happens. But this team 100% got better in the offseason. I love to see them going out there and making these sorts of moves over the last two transfer windows. It is an exciting time, honestly, to be an Austin fan. And I can understand that there would be other fans of other teams around the league who would be jealous of what's happening right now.
Excellent. Okay. I have one more question. I mean,
Maybe.
a little bit personal, talks about your plans and all that. Are we going to see you in Austin for the All-Star game?
That is my hope. That is
good.
my hope. I have made it to the last few MLS All-Star games. I would love to be back again this year. It's always a fun time to see other people in and around the game, the media space inside the game. So yes, fingers crossed, without any absolute locked-in plans, I would like to be there.
I mean, it is warm here in the summer, but you were from Phoenix. You know warm in the summer?
Yep. I think I can handle it. The humidity is always a foreign beast to me, but I'm not afraid of sweating. I was in Texas last summer for the Copa America when the U.S. was there against Bolivia in Dallas. That was rough. So I'm ready. I'm ready for it. I'm ready to sweat. Bring it up.
Austin's not quite Dallas or Houston. And there are better breweries. Yeah.
I've never been. I would love to go. I would love to go and eat a lot of barbecue and any other recommendations that you have.
I will help you on that quest. So
Good
I will
man.
show you the
I love
breweries
it.
to go to, the barbecue places to go to. Yeah, it'll be great. So yeah, if you
Excellent.
get here, please let me know. So that's Joe Lowery,
course.
everybody. Any kind of last parting words? Any obviously plug where that people can find you?
Yeah, I guess people can go and find a lot of my work over at Backheeled.com. I think we're doing really good, fun, not seen before MLS coverage in a lot of ways. So go check that out and subscribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's having the time that we had at the Striker and all that. It is such a big challenge to do a national facing site that covers MLS. And I think you guys have done excellent, and kudos to you for keeping it rolling and keeping the good coverage and doing all the in-depth stuff that you do. Yeah.
Thank
And then
you.
Total Soccer
Appreciate
Show,
it,
of course, we can hear you on that as well.
Yes, Total Soccer Show, 4 or 5 days a week. Shows Monday through Friday. We're doing a weekly MLS show on Tuesdays now. That's a bit more structured than it's been in the past. USMNT show every Wednesday. Champions League stuff, you sort of name it, and we're talking about it. So always love doing those shows with those guys.
Okay, well, great. Well, Joe, thanks so much for taking time out and enjoy all the soccer that's happening. We'll see what happens with San Diego and all the other teams here.
Phil, thank you for having me, and hopefully we'll see you in a few months.
Yeah, that'd be great. Hey, Amy.
What?
How you doing?
Good.
I have some bad news.
What?
Okay, so Joe Lowery and I did a big look at week 1.
Who's
Joe Lowery is a writer for Backheeled and he is on a podcast called The Total Soccer Show, and he does some writing for MLS. And we did a big MLS preview where we talked about most of the 30 teams. Guess we forgot to talk.
who?
You sh-
Austin F.
No, we talked about Austin FC.
The White.
We didn't talk about the Whitecaps.
I'm not that.
I'm sorry.
I'm
They're not on a lot of people's radar yet.
We team is the rename. Here's what they have to rename. Here, every coach out there is wanting to rename that team. Hear me out.
Okay.
Baking Cougars.
Bacon Cougars. Okay. I like that. That's a good name. Okay. Any of you out there, if the Whitecaps move, like let's say they move to Indianapolis, which is being talked about, should they be the Indianapolis Bacon Cougars? Would you still like them? Okay.
It'd still be a good team.
They'd still be a good team. They wouldn't be the Whitecaps, but they'd be the Indy Bacon Cougars, that'd be pretty cool too.